DJ, super stoked to have you here on the Mark Divine Show. Appreciate your time, brother.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, I was really excited to see you on the kind of docket. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm a big fan of Native American warriors and deeply inspired by that tradition myself. And I'm super stoked to kind of get into it with you and get your perspective. But give us a sense before we kind of get into like warriorship. What was your life like growing up? Were you in Ottawa, up in Canada, or where did you grow up, and what was what were your influences like early on?
Yeah, my tribe is from Michigan, so I'm
Michigan. Okay.
Yeah, I'm an enrolled member of the Ottowa Tribe. But I grew up in a military environment. My dad was in uniform for 21 years, enlisted man in the Air Force. But also on in my family, my grandma taught our traditional language. We had a history of military service in my family. So it was a familiar path that kind of, the alignment was all there, even from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why the progression of, the work that I do now has just been such I guess it's an on-ramp I've been building my entire life, through that exposure. But and I grew up all over the U.S. Grew up in South Dakota, North Dakota, Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
Wherever the Air Force stationed us. And then I served in uniform for 14 years myself and bounced around quite a bit. But
well, I understand the military culture fairly well, and I know Air Force is different than Navy and whatnot. But within that culture, what kind of rituals and things did your family do to kind of teach you and keep the Ottawa tribal kind of culture alive for you, or bring it alive probably?
Yeah. Even as a kid, I mean, I was always taught, who I was, where we came from. I had a real good sense of that and a pride in it, that I understood from a young age that my people sacrificed a lot to allow me the opportunities I have today. Military service is always something that has been important in our tribal communities. We have the highest service rates of any ethnic group in America.
No kidding.
And have for over
100 years.
You mean
across all tribes, or just
across all tribes? Across all tribes. And it's because of that warrior spirit tradition being expressed in military service. I was part of a PBS documentary a couple years ago called The Warrior Tradition. And it was telling that story of our service rates. And I was honored to be featured in that. But it was, being able to tell that story of how we express those warrior traditions, especially when it comes to military service now, which highlighted that. And then that led to an opportunity to have my own PBS show that I wrote, produced, and hosted called Discovering Your Warrior Spirit, which aired nationally last year.
Oh, that's really cool.
So it's something important in our tribal communities, always has been, and will continue to be.
Do all tribes have a warrior culture, or is it just a few select tribes like Ottawa? And I remember I'm from upstate New York, Mohawk Valley. I know the Mohicans were made famous by
they were our enemies
by their movie. They were probably the enemies of you guys.
Well, they were part of the Iroquois League, so we fought them on the east, and then on the west we fought like the Dakota, which is like the Woodlands Sioux, and then. But no, it's most tribes have some semblance of a warrior culture. Not all of them. Like up in Alaska, you have tribes that are a lot more pacific. They deal with their conflicts in a very different way. The environment is so harsh up there that tribes, collaboration was key for survival. So there wasn't a whole lot of extracurricular activity, raiding other villages. It was just hard enough to survive on your own. But most tribes had some semblance of a warrior culture. It was, the protectors, the leadership of the tribe. But, what I teach now with that warrior concept is the way that I share that with my groups that I work with. It transcends race, age, gender, stage of life. It's I talk about the universal principles that made our warriors special and can have an impact in our life when we apply them too.
Yeah, I agree with that. The warrior, the calling of the warrior is an archetypal energy, right?
Yes.
Not everyone has it. If you have it, then you pretty much know you have it. The military is one path, but it's certainly not the only path, as you point out. And you can be a warrior in any particular domain of life. Mother, father, right?
Yeah.
Merchant, right? So I want to get into that. But I do want to still stick with this educating myself really about how you were taught about the history of your tribe, and the what happened with the white man coming to the shores and kind of like spreading throughout the
Yeah.
westward regions, and how, whether that brought tribes together or split them apart. How, what were you taught in terms of that history
It
of
was a
yours?
steamroller process. I
Yeah.
mean, when we talk about the history of this country with Native people, it's not a kind or pretty history.
It's
It
not pretty
continues
at
to be
all. Yeah.
challenging.
There's a lot of cultural guilt around, or collective guilt, I think, that we all have around that as well.
Yeah, it's tough. The nation's first people, always got treated last, and
Right.
it continues to be a challenge. But the thing that tribes found themselves outmatched, outgunned,
Mm-hmm.
out
Mm-hmm.
technologied. But what made our warriors special is they still found a way to rally and protect their people.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes even winning battles against being completely outmatched and in
Mm-hmm.
so many different ways. But
Did the
that warrior
tribes
spirit
band
was
together to try to fight, the
it,
common enemy? That was probably a problem, right? They might have had a little bit more success if they were to come together.
You're right, and I always think about that. I thought about writing a fiction story at some point in
Mm-hmm.
my writing career, where I talk about like these tribes coming together sooner and
Right.
how that may have played out. But yeah, it was kind of too little, too late. There was a
Yeah.
couple moments in time where that happened. Our chief Pontiac of the Ottowa Tribe united 19 different tribes throughout the Ohio
Okay.
River Valley,
Wow.
which was unique. That hadn't happened before because typically, tribes, we raided each other. We fought with each
Right.
other. We didn't try to decimate each other, but that was the way
Mm-hmm.
we kind of got
Mm-hmm.
uh, our warriors to go on their first foray,
Mm-hmm.
into enemy territory. And so that was how we, created our warrior class. But it was a very different type of warfare,
Right.
But once
Right.
tribes realized
It
that
was really
if
guerrilla warfare against kind of like
really
frontal assault type warfare.
exactly, and it wasn't
Yeah.
siege warfare, it
It was
wasn't like
right.
try to starve an enemy out, try to burn a village down. It wasn't that type of fighting. It was small scale, engagements. And then another time, like for instance, Tecumseh, one of my
Mm-hmm.
role models and heroes,
Yeah. It is.
did it again to fight the Americans. He actually allied with the British, during the War of 1812,
Mm-hmm.
but they were trying to shove, Americans back to the shores of, back to the colonies. So
Mm-hmm.
he united a bunch of tribes too, but it was rare to see that happen. And then when it started happening on a more regular basis, it was, kind of the battles were already lost.
It was too late.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about how one of the major things that really kind of put a nail into the heart of the Indian nations was the smallpox, and how that was a U.S. Army kind of trickery where they distributed blankets that
Blankets.
were infested with smallpox. Is that a true story
Oh
from
yeah.
your perspective? Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah, biological warfare was something that we didn't have the immunities,
That's right.
and so it wiped out entire villages, entire populations, um, and that happened
That's horrific, by the way. I just
from
think
the
that's one of the most horrific things I've ever heard that
yeah,
we could do. And we used to see it happening to this day. You're like, we really haven't evolved that much.
cringeworthy,
It's
cringeworthy.
cringeworthy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but disease
Horrible.
wiped out a lot of tribal populations, even right before first contact.
Right.
Even when Europeans made it to this hemisphere,
Yeah.
the
Down,
disease
down
started to
south. That's
spread.
what took out
Yeah,
the Aztecs and the Mayans and all that.
yeah, and it went all the way up into North America. So by the time
Interesting.
the English, started landing on the eastern shore, they saw kind of sparse populations. There's a great book, 1491 by Charles Mann, and he talks
Yeah.
about how the
Yeah. I've heard of it.
population of, the United States, as far as with it, before it was the United States, just the North American continent, could have had up to 120 million
Really?
people, but they
Wow.
were wiped out by 90%, wiped
No
out
kidding.
because of disease. And that's one of those figures that I read about from time to time that becomes more and more based on scientific research and facts. That is pretty
Wow.
shocking. But again, you're dealing with a population that has zero immunities towards the
Right.
diseases that Europeans have been fighting for millennia.
That's crazy. Yeah, I don't think we need to go down that road about the potential of pandemics to do great harm, because
Yeah,
obviously saw that recently.
we're all kind of raw from that one.
We're a
Yeah.
little bit raw from that one. Now, sticking with kind of the Native American. By the way, the other tribe that greatly inspired me were the Apache Warriors. And the
Mm-hmm.
only reason that I was inspired by them was through training from a fellow named Tom Brown. Are you familiar with his work?
I'm not.
He's the tracker, the very famous
Oh
tracker.
yeah, yes,
And,
I do know who you're talking
he
about.
had a mentor who was an Apache, who spent the last like 20 years of his life with Tom when Tom was in his formative years, like 14 or 15 up into his early 20s, mid 20s, and taught him all the scouting techniques and all the tracking and also the spiritual traditions of the Apache. And they
Yeah.
were really rich, right? And I'm sure that, in your Ottowa tribe, like the visualization practices that they had, the rituals around becoming a warrior,
Mm-hmm.
right? Spending a year in the wilderness and, some of the, like I said, some of the imagery work that they had to do and some of the healing and forgiveness and the prayer work that they did. It was really quite extraordinary. So I
Yeah,
don't
there's
know.
deep cultural ties. I mean, that deep spiritual ties in that role of a warrior. In our
Right.
tribal communities, it went beyond, even the time that I had in the military. What made it different than that experience was there's a heavy spiritual component.
Right.
In our tribal communities when it comes to that role, and it was based on love.
Right.
That was our secret weapon. We loved who we fought for and what we fought
Right.
for, and that's why they fought the way that they did. That's why Apaches, with Geronimo, they fought to the bitter end. I
That's
mean, there
right.
was only a small band of them being tracked by 5,000 U.S. Army soldiers.
That's right.
It
They
was
were like,
amazing,
they were like the public enemy number one, with a reward on their head, but they were so hard to kill because they
right?
were just so advanced spiritually.
Elusive,
I remember this learning, that I'm sure again the other warriors like in your tribe were able to do these things, but this notion of understanding psychology and how the brain works so well that they could literally hide in plain sight, right? So they understood that like if I'm standing and I'm looking out at a scene that is not familiar with me, like I'm traversing some new countryside, that my brain, my eyes will pick out the big features, right? Like, oh, there's a big mountain range over there and there's a cluster of trees. But then it kind of like, to save energy, it fills in the gaps,
right?
leaving out details.
Yeah,
And so if you know where to hide, it's better to hide like in plain sight where there's not a feature that your brain is going to like zero in on the details. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So they would hide
yeah.
in literally like in plain sight.
Well, and that's the
It's
thing,
so
though.
cool. So cool.
Warriors and scouts, I mean, they were so tied. I mean, tribal people in general were so completely tied to the environment
Right.
and knew the comings and goings and the patterns and kind of
That's
could
right.
predict weather changes and migration patterns.
Yeah, and
That's what
understand what the animals are up to and kind of follow their
exactly,
patterns. Tom Brown
exactly.
called that reading the morning newspaper.
There you go.
He would get
Completely
up every morning
integrated
and
into
he
your
would see
environment.
what all the animals had done that morning, early
Yeah,
morning, and they're foraging and be like, oh yeah, so the fox went after this critter over here and this happened over there. And, you can start to orient, your day based upon
that's it.
what the
Yeah, because
animal
when
was.
Europeans came to the shores of North America, they thought native people were magic.
Right.
Because of how accurate they were with their predictions, how
Yeah.
integrated they were into their environment. They could read the signs, and it was an incredible
Yeah.
system that had been developed through a lifetime.
One of the rationales. So I was a SEAL, as you know, and I had done
Mm-hmm.
that 3 different trainings with Tom, and that kind of stacked on top of my meditation and spiritual practice, which started with Zen and through the martial arts when I was 21. So,
Yeah.
4 years before I joined the SEALs, I had got my black belt and I'd been studying Zen pretty much every day. And I continue it, in the military. But as you know, sometimes in the military, given the schedules and what we're doing, it's hard to keep a daily like seated meditation. So I taught myself to take it wherever I was, to carry
Yeah.
my meditation around, kind of like I would my sidearm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So whenever I had downtime, and as you know, in the military, there's a lot of downtime.
Yeah. Fit it in where you can. Yeah.
Where you say I would just be meditating and contemplating and breathing and whatnot. And so I had a lot of like really, really cool experiences. And that led me to, as I tried to continue my martial arts training here in San Diego, and there wasn't much going on here, I got
Mm-hmm.
into yoga. Yoga's was a huge yoga community here.
Yeah.
And that led me down a whole nother rabbit hole of the Eastern traditions, Patanjali Yoga Sutras and Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, and recognizing that yoga was also like the foundation of most of the Eastern martial arts.
Yeah.
But there was like these parallel systems, right? And so the natives had their systems, and then the Easterners had their systems, but the people who didn't have any system were the Westerners who came out of Europe, because
Yeah.
they relied on dogmatic structural religion, right, for their spirituality, and it
Right.
lacked, or they had stripped out all these deep personal practices that led you to find God within,
There you go. Yeah. The
right?
holistic approach.
The
Yeah.
holistic approach. So I was like, in my whole life, I was so inspired, and had such extraordinary success and experiences because of my martial arts and the yoga training, and then recognizing the sameness in the Apache traditions,
Yeah.
that I wanted to bring that to the SEALs. And that's why I started Sealfit.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? So
Yeah.
my intention behind Sealfit was to create a whole warrior again that was lacking in the Western military.
Yeah.
And so I started teaching SEAL trainees and special operators. I had to simplify everything. I called it taking the foo out of the kung fu. So
Okay.
I couldn't teach, pranayama or any, I couldn't like call it. Like one thing I did, like what I got from the Apaches was something called fox walking.
Mm-hmm.
Fox walking is basically mindful walking, where you take one step per minute and you use a soft gaze. So you're turning your attention inward, allowing information to flow in as opposed to projecting outward
Yeah.
with a hard gaze. And you do this for about an hour. And it's like the last few feet you would take if you were stalking, a deer, right?
Right.
You'd stalk a deer, and then the last few feet, the last like 10 or 20 feet, you'd do this
You go
fox walk.
really slow. Yeah.
Extraordinarily slow, no sound, your mind completely empty, so the deer can't feel your
Yeah.
energy. So I would use those, but I could explain that very well to the SEAL candidates. But anything that came from like an Eastern or esoteric tradition, they're glazed over. So I
It's
took it
yeah.
all that out, and I just started calling it like box breathing, right?
Yeah.
And when when it came to like internal dialogue and managing the mind, I just called it what it was,
Mm-hmm.
mental control, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And boy, do they love it. And 90% of these guys got through SEAL training, or are getting through SEAL training. And now the SEALs are using these skills that I call unbeatable mind, which is really
Yeah.
cool. But my point for bringing this up is that the whole rationale was to create a more complete warrior, because I was
That's
so
it.
deeply inspired by those traditions and what I'd learned from the Apaches, that the warrior is the last to pick up the weapon. Literally
Mm-hmm.
the last to pick up the spear or the lance. And when they do so, when they're forced to do so, they do so with great reverence
Mm-hmm.
and even love for their enemies. And I remember
Yeah.
a poem, I wish I had it in front of me, but a poem from this Apache scout written in like 1890 or something, where he's about to send the scouts into battle, and he's asking for forgiveness. And he's
Yeah.
asking for, the great spirit that runs through all things to guide their hands and to guide their hearts, for they love their enemy as they love themselves.
Yeah.
It's
It's
powerful.
that's the honor part in
Right.
battle, how it was
Right.
done traditionally. Not the decimation and, like I said, complete destruction of a village
Right.
or a population of people, but there was an honor there because of what it required. It tested us in ways
That's right.
that were very unique, that were very powerful, and deep. And that's one of the things too, that integrating that spirituality, those personal practices. Like I've been through traditional vision quest. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also a veteran sun dancer.
Are
Like you
you?
go
Nice.
through these ceremonies. I mean, I went through a ceremony that, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull had gone through.
Mm-hmm.
They were sun dancers. It was, to go through these experiences, you realize that there's an integration there of the spiritual and what goes much deeper than just the skill sets that a warrior would get.
Right.
How to shoot a bow and arrow, how to
Mm-hmm.
throw a lance, how to fight with a tomahawk.
It's
It's
important to
going into
master all
it.
those, of course, but then you
Absolutely.
move beyond those to master the mental and spiritual domains.
Exactly. One of the things I talk about in my book, uh, The Warrior Within, was how the katana blade was crafted and why it was a unique,
Mm-hmm.
probably the finest sword ever crafted
Mm-hmm.
on the face of the earth, because it was made from two types of metal.
Mm-hmm.
One that has hardness, which resists impact. It's stiff, it's inflexible. But if you build the whole sword with that, it becomes brittle.
Right.
And that's what happens to us if we just get a skill set and we don't develop that deeper side of resilience, what
Mm-hmm.
real resilience is like. It's being strong like grass, not like a
Right.
tree.
Right.
And so that second type of metal in the katana is soft. What metallurgists call it has toughness, which
Mm-hmm.
means it can absorb impact, it can flex under strain.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we develop that emotional capacity, that spiritual capacity to absorb whatever's happening to
Mm-hmm.
us so we can get back into the
I
fight.
love
And
that.
it's sustainable.
It's
We can do it
sustainable.
day in and day out throughout our journey. We don't burn out. We don't break. That's what happens when we're inflexible, and stiff
Right.
without that deeper capacity.
Yeah, and the forging that sword is a long, long process of interweaving the hard and the soft, the yin and the yang,
Yeah.
right? And so
And
that
it,
they're inseparable.
and so it is to build a warrior too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah, that's a big part of what I'm teaching people is like we're so over yang in our culture. We're all hard. We're all biased toward action, doing, skill based training,
Yeah.
and do more equals more success. And I think the last few years, the bloom is off that rose. People are
Yeah.
starting to recognize that that's a flawed approach.
Yeah.
So they're looking for answers. But and the funny thing is that the answers have been here all along.
They have.
Right? They were on this territory before the white people arrived.
And
Right?
thank God. I mean, isn't it a great boost to know that the fundamentals are still fundamental,
That's
that the
right.
basics are still basic, and they work. These are
They work.
timeless
It just
ideas.
requires an
Yeah.
acceptance, an appreciation that these are the advanced technologies. But they just don't look advanced to you because they don't come wrapped in a shiny package that you open like and out pops like an iPod or something like that, or
That's
an
it.
iPhone.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing some people now kind of who get it, who are like, okay, well, if I can wrap, like I got this breathing device which literally comes in a box and it's nothing but a little toy that expands and contracts in your hand, and you're supposed to like synchronize your breathing to it. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's kind of sad, but it's also a little bit genius because they recognize that people need a shiny object. But the problem is
Yeah.
that they won't stick with it. The batteries will go out, they'll lose it, and then they'll.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm wondering how do you teach, and how did the Ottowa Tribe teach a, the practice or the disciplines of the warrior so that they became just inculcated into your daily life?
It was integrated into everything. I mean, I've
Really?
worked with over 500 tribal nations, including my own. But
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that comes back over and over again is the way that warriors were developed was on purpose, with purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and with a clear cut design. And it's happened from childhood. Look where people got used to being in the elements, being
Right.
uncomfortable,
Right.
being patient, being in a place of solitude. Not just learning the skills, but like I said, what we were talking about before, that developing that mental toughness piece where you can
Mm-hmm.
deal with adversity, you can deal with setbacks, discomfort, pain, fear.
So you're
And
saying it was all like in the dialoguing, the dinner time and breakfast
everything, it was
rituals.
integrated into everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a way of life, truly.
Yeah.
Because there are people dependent on that group for protection, for
Right.
defense. And so it
Was
was a
there
big role.
anything that looked like what we would call a meditative practice that was taught?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
So what did that
Yeah.
look like for you?
Prayer.
Prayer.
All of our ceremonies, when we talk about prayer, like for instance, Vision Quest,
Yeah.
I did that for 4 years, and that's the
Describe
translation is,
it
yeah,
for us.
it's the Lakota call it Hamblecha Yapi, which means to cry for a vision. And you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why they call it that until you go out on yours.
Yeah,
So
because
it's
you're
four
alone for
days.
days, right?
Yeah,
28 days.
4 days, 4 nights, no food,
Okay.
no water, no shelter. You do this
Okay.
every year,
Right.
and you're in an area the size of a tabletop.
I want to do one of those, by the way. I've
And
always wanted to.
it was one of the most clarifying experiences I've ever had in my life. And you're with your medicine people. They it's called putting you out on the hill, so you're out in isolation. And I'm telling you, Mark, I've never had a more clarifying experience in my life where it felt like the dirt in my mud.
I saw the Navy SEAL
actually
character
settled.
do that on the movie Yellowstone. Have you seen Yellowstone?
I haven't seen that series. I've seen
Okay.
1883, but I haven't seen
83 is
Yellowstone.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yellowstone,
I loved it.
It's pretty violent, but they do send the son who was a Navy SEAL ends up going on a vision quest, and it's pretty cool the way they show that.
They're powerful, and it's the
Is
whole
there any
purpose was to pray
medicine
for
involved?
guidance.
Like plant medicine or?
Well, I mean, you have your pipe,
Okay.
and what we burn in our pipe is just traditional tobacco or kinnikinnick, which is red willow bark. But as far as any other type of medicine, I mean, we can smudge, we burn sage, sweetgrass. That's medicine
You're
for
just, it's
us.
just you and nature
That's it.
and your thoughts, or getting
That's
away
it.
from your thoughts.
That's it. And I'm telling you, it was, to let that dirt settle in your mud puddle that clearly. No media, no traffic, no other people.
No
it,
cell
it is
phone.
a clarifying experience unlike anything I've ever had before. But the point was that prayer aspect was integrated into our sweat lodge ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
all of our traditional ceremonies, prayer, solitude. We didn't call it meditation,
Mm-hmm.
but it absolutely was. I mean, when
Right.
you're out on Vision Quest, you're meditating continually.
Right.
You're thinking about your breathing, you're observing nature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are in a zone that is very powerful. And I'm a active, I'm a practitioner of meditation and
Mm-hmm.
yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done martial arts. I've
Mm-hmm.
boxed in college. I did 4.5 years of Krav Maga,
Mm-hmm.
did kickboxing for a while. So it's always been like that. There's been an overlay and integration of all these different practices.
Right.
But meditation is critically important, and
Mm-hmm.
was for our tribal people too. Still is.
When I did the Tom Brown training in what he calls his philosophy track, which was the spiritual track,
Mm-hmm.
he talked about the Apaches training with their minds, where they would develop or access what they call their sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
And they would actually, it sounded a lot to me, sort of like what the hypnotherapy profession had kind of tapped into, where they would walk down kind of through their conscious mind, and then they would access their subconscious.
Those deeper places.
Yeah, they would access the subconscious by walking through literally what they considered to be a portal,
mm-hmm.
which was the doorway between the kind of the outer material realm and the first, what they call, band of the spiritual realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you could consider that maybe to be the same band that someone who's learned to astral travel or who has an out of body experience, they kind of like, they go into that band, and yet they're still connected to their physical body, so they can kind of snap back really quick. They don't get lost, so to speak.
Right.
I thought this was fascinating, and he talked about how that grandfather, who was his mentor, told him that went to the Apache envisioning. They called it envisioning, which is creating a vision and having visions and experiencing visions. When they had it, when they were trained, like deeply trained it after a number of years, that the vision was more real than their experience in the material world.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, he tells us, this is a fun story. This is just one of like many, but like he's with grandfather, and they're on this trail, and they sit down along this trail to meditate, and they go into this state, and Tom goes into one of these vision states, and while he's doing this vision state, he sees some Apaches walking along the trail. This must have been hundreds of years ago, right? And the last one walking along this trail was just a small, like 12, 14-year-old boy, and something falls out of his pouch. And then they go off on their way. And when Tom came out of this vision, he was like, huh, and he went over to where this artifact had dropped, and he started digging, and he pulled up an arrowhead that was right there. You know what I mean? Right exactly where he saw it drop.
Yeah, I tell you, cool? there's a lot in the universe we don't understand, but these practices have been around for a long time. The belief is strong, and it's for reasons like that. I mean, Crazy Horse had an idea, a philosophy as well, that this world that we live in is the dream world, and when he was actually asleep, that was the real world. That was the spiritual realm that really mattered.
That lines up with kind of the yoga tradition that says that what we are experiencing here really is an illusion or a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's another aspect of us that is having this dream that is our real self.
Yeah.
Boy, so it's fascinating. It's fascinating philosophy. It's a little hard for people steeped in the material without any of this training or any kind of research or investigation in this or experiences to really wrap their head around it. But I've been deeply inspired by that. And I think it's true. I'll say that publicly. I really do think it's true. And you start to kind of marry that up with the notion of synchronicity, and how that, right, when you surrender, instead of just trying to force your way, thinking that everything is material, linear, time and space, cause and effect, when you surrender to the fact that there is this kind of unity that underlies everything, and you begin to vibrate at that frequency, then you have synchronicities pop up all the time.
You're in
Life
flow.
just starts to experience that life flow, right?
The older I get, the more I realize that is a much better way to walk the journey.
100%.
Is be open to, what's happening, and whether you say that, the mantra, let go and let God, be in flow, be in state, be mindful. Right. It's just, taking our hands off the wheels to control every dang aspect of our lives. I mean, which burns up a lot of time and energy, usually doesn't get the results we want anyway. Sometimes can completely backfire.
Right. You can get some results, but they're often not the results you want long term.
Yeah. But when you're
or it comes
at
great cost.
Right? Yes, absolutely. To ourselves or to our relationships. I mean, it can get pretty chaotic because we are putting energy into places that it doesn't need to be, instead of being open to what's happening around us. I think we get a lot better results when we do that.
What's coming to me now is another two terms that really have inspired me that came from the warrior tradition of the Japanese, the samurai and that kind of ilk. One is Shibumi, and it speaks to what we're talking about. When you're in that flow, Shibumi means effortless perfection. Like things spontaneously arise, and they just are exactly the way they need to be in that moment.
Yeah.
And you see this like when I first met my Zen master, who was also my martial arts instructor. He was the founder of this style of karate called Seido. He had hundreds of thousands of students worldwide. He was about 45 at the time that I met him. His name was Tadashi Nakamura. And, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, literally 375 people in my town.
Okay.
And I had never experienced or come into contact with anyone who I would even remotely call enlightened. Just wasn't something that we were able to access. And most people haven't, to be fair. But when I stepped foot into that martial arts studio, it's like 2,000 square feet, beautiful wood floor, hundreds of students training. And in the middle of the floor was this 5'5" or 6 Japanese guy who was just like, he was built like a brick shithouse. And he was like this radically intense, but there was like this energy around him. I could just see this energy around him,
Yeah.
And, he would stop and correct people and do his thing. And then someone cracked a joke in the corner. Right. And you would, I expected him to go all ballistic. Right.
Yeah.
And instead, he looks over and you see a little smile crack on his face, and he just starts bursting out laughing like a little schoolgirl.
Yeah. See, he's in the moment at the moment.
He was in the moment, and it was like spontaneous perfection, and it didn't bring any kind of discredit to his authority at all. It actually uplifted it because everyone's like, oh, this guy is a grandmaster, and he's human.
Yeah, there you go. He's got
and
the
he's
depth.
Human, and so that he's not hiding. Right behind any mask, like what you see is what you get, moment to moment to moment to moment. And I think that's like to me, it's always been my tell of an ultimate warrior is like, are they wearing a mask?
Yeah,
or not? And most people do. They're not aware of it, right? They're hiding behind some masks.
Yeah, I mean, we get rewarded for it, unfortunately. Right. When we're putting that facade out and we're portraying this false image of perfection, and we've got it all tied together at any given moment. We get rewarded for that. Right. It's not real. We all stumble, we all struggle, we all need outside support and encouragement or answers at times. And the more we can embrace that, I think that's where true strength, really starts to emerge, because we realize it's, again, you're thinking big picture here. It's not about us. Our warriors were very clear in their purpose. It was to feed and protect their people, not to feed and protect their ego. So when you get out of your own way, you can really deliver, you can really contribute at a much higher level, right? Because you're removing yourself from stopping the flow of what you could ultimately do.
Right. But they also recognize, even though, because there were scarce resources and their tribe was the most important, they also recognized that everything and everyone was important.
Yes.
So they didn't disrespect nature. Right. If they were going to cut a tree down, they made sure that it was the right tree to cut down, and they did ceremony around it. If they were going to go into battle because of the scarce resources against a neighboring tribe or to protect their tribe from them, it was with great reverence that any loss of life was a big deal. And I think that if we could bring that back to get people to recognize the sameness in everything and everybody, and to appreciate the diversity.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of using diversity as a club right? Over people.
Yes. Yeah. That's unfortunately been all too often the pattern
Yeah.
recently.
Right.
And, that's what makes the environment beautiful. That's what makes the world beautiful, is that diversity, that we're not all the same, that,
Right.
environments are stronger when they're diverse.
And
They
yet we
bounce back.
all come from the same source, and we'll all
Hey,
go
there you
back to
go.
the same source, and we all have that same spirit that runs through all things that the
Yeah.
natives talk about, right?
But we love to focus on the differences.
That's right. We
Gosh,
do. Because
that's
that's where we're
just,
trained. And like you said, we're
yeah.
rewarded for that. The other word that really inspired me, and I'm wondering if there's a corollary in the native tradition or Ottowan tradition, and we use it for our big 50-hour crucible event, which is like, it's our version of Hell Week, where we
Yeah.
really have to bring yourself, mind, body, and spirit, and work in the spirit of harmony, or else you just won't get through it.
Yeah.
It's Kokoro, and Kokoro means to merge your heart and your head into your hands, or into your actions. So
Yeah.
head, heart, hara, head, heart, hands,
Yeah.
integration, right? Leading from the heart, however you want to say it. Whole
Yeah.
mind is another way to say it.
Yeah. We
Is
have a
there any?
tradition in my tribe. We have two ways of learning. We have Bokadwin and Kendaswin. And Kendaswin is head learning. It's logic.
Yeah.
It's important in the
Information
world.
and knowledge. Yeah.
Information and knowledge. And it's important in the world we live in. But the other type of learning is Bokadwin. It's the learning that comes to us when we're in a place of solitude or quiet.
Mm-hmm.
When we turn down the volume of all the crazy that we're in, the chaos, and get to that space where meditation, prayer, where you're isolating yourself, and listening to that internal voice.
Right.
It can't be heard. You can't honor it if you never give yourself time to actually listen to it.
That's
And
right.
so that's an important concept. And I think those are where the best decisions I've ever made in my life have come from. I've made a lot of decisions based on just this, that,
Sure. Me too.
it's kind of a
They've all
mixed
sucked.
bag on those results. Yeah. But I can't, but I tell you, it's few and far between I've ever made, using that type of learning, that intuition, that gut level whisper that talks to us when we're quiet and when we honor it. Sometimes we train it out of us. Sometimes we ignore it, especially if it's telling us messages that we don't want to hear. If that message is coming up to like, you should take care of yourself. And we're like, shut up. I'm working on this. I'll get to it later.
Right.
We pay for that. There's a
it,
real
yeah.
cost in
Gosh, I
ignoring
remember
that.
training for the CrossFit Games, and this is, I'm well into all this training, so I could have had a version of this conversation with you at that time.
Yeah.
And my point for telling this story is that how easily it is to kind of ignore the intuition or the inner voice, even when it's kind of like fairly loud.
Yeah.
Smacking you. Like, so I was training for the CrossFit Games, for my age group, the Open, and I was doing this workout, and my coach, the coach who was coaching me, was actually one of my coaches, and I hired him. He's a young guy, but I wanted, have him hold me accountable. And so the workout was like three bars of death. It was bench press, power cleans, and deadlift, right? And just doing a descending ladder, 10-1. And the deadlifts, he had stacked a little bit over my training weight, right?
Okay.
And in the first round of this workout, I literally had a vision of my back blowing out and me falling on the ground.
Oh boy.
And I didn't do anything about it. I ignored it. And guess what happened?
Yes.
In the second to last round, when we were on the twos, I go to lift that bar, and I must have been just slightly out of position, and boom.
Yeah.
And I'm laying on the ground, and I'm immediately thought was, Mark, you know better than that. You know better, right?
You felt it coming. You saw
that
it
was
coming.
The last time I was like, okay, never again am I going to ignore that.
Yeah, you got to listen. I mean, I did the same thing, Mark, earlier. When I first started this career, I was an officer in the military. We had just started a family. I had a lot of responsibility. There was a lot of moving parts and a lot of stress. And I kept ignoring, taking care of myself. And I kept saying, I'll get to it later. And I had all the classic signs of, my body trying to tell me to slow down.
Right.
I was hearing that internal voice, and I just basically said, shut up. I'll get to you later. And later showed up with a vengeance. I woke up one morning with what I thought was a heat rash down the right side of my body to the top of my thigh. It was shingles.
Oof.
And it was 6 weeks of a living hell type of experience. I wouldn't wish
that's
that
just
on
an
enemy.
autoimmune response from being so ridiculously out of balance.
Exactly. And the doctor I saw that had been practicing medicine for 30 years looked at me and he said, what are you doing to yourself? Because
Yeah.
I was 28 at the time, but you can push. Sometimes we don't. We can see the writing on the wall. We don't change until we hit the wall. You don't have to learn that way. By the
Right.
way, that was a painful experience, but that's why I'm a born again advocate for self care. You are the only
100%.
you'll
The
ever have or be.
irony, the irony is that people don't think they have the time
Isn't that
to slow
interesting?
down, or
Yeah.
the time to sit in silence, or the time to take a retreat, or even a weekend off, right?
Yeah.
And the irony is that when you have that mindset, then the universe will take that time for you in a painful way,
There you go.
right? And
Yes.
furthermore, the other way to look at this is when you develop the skills to go inside and to tap into that wisdom that we're talking about, it doesn't take an equal amount of time as things do in the linear material world. Like, so,
Hmm.
if I say I've got like this task list, to work on my business, or to write
Yeah.
my, let's say I'm working on a book, and I'm working on my business, and I'm working on my nonprofit, all of which is true. And I'm
Hmm.
working on my PhD right now, all of which is
Oh
true.
my gosh.
So
Okay.
like I've got a pretty significant task list for all of those. And I could fill every single minute up
Right.
every day with that task list. And that's how we're, like you said earlier, that's what we're trained to do. That's the training of our schools, just this endless, insane, right, list of projects and homeworks and things to do that really don't contribute much to learning. It's just to fill your day up to keep you distracted. Same
Yeah.
thing at work, right? You got to fill those 40 hours up or whatever. And then if you're not doing a project, then culture is training you by filling it up with all this other distracting bullshit, the
Right.
entertainment and social media. And honestly, it's a genius way to keep people from going within
Yes.
and being healthy, and finding out that they don't need pharmacologicals, and they don't need to go to the emergency room every 3 weeks, right? Because they're super
Yeah.
healthy. They
Yeah.
don't need to go on the diet because their body is in perfect balance. They don't need to overtrain because their body feels like, oh yeah, I know I need to take a day off, right? Everything that is distracting you, taking extra time suddenly goes away because you spend just 5 minutes a day,
Yeah.
just 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day. I recommend to my team 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, 20 minutes, that's all you really need. And then
And
take
yeah,
a couple little 1 minute breaks during the day.
we have a different view on that word medicine. And that's what
Yeah,
we're talking about here. Medicine in
right.
our tribal communities isn't something we seek out when we're already sick and out of balance. It's something we incorporate into our lives daily
Right.
to keep us
Right.
strong and resilient. My people,
Breathing fresh
yes,
oxygen in nature is medicine.
anything and everything that keeps you healthy, mind, body, and spirit, can be considered medicine. We call it mshkeke, which translate into strength that you gather from the earth.
I love it. Oh, I
Anything can
love that.
qualify. But when
Right.
you don't incorporate that into your life, this is where fulfilling your role becomes unsustainable.
Right.
Is being a warrior is somebody who can show up day in and day out, deliver on their responsibilities, impact the world, contribute. Being a martyr is somebody who goes until the wheels fall off, stands back and says, "What the hell
Look at
happened
me.
here?"
Look how
Yeah,
good I am. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, look how good I am until I fall apart.
Yeah. It's all ego. Right.
And yeah, exactly. So that medicine is incorporated. It's critically important to have that in our life to keep us strong.
100%. And it's not just for health and well-being and thriving as a human. You truly, when you learn to slow down and go within, you tap into that wisdom of your inner voice, right? And the wisdom
You
of
do.
your instinctual drives that say, don't go there because it's dangerous or it's not your path. But do go follow this. And that do might be contrary to what your fear-based brain is telling you.
Yeah.
So when you learn to go within every day in these quiet time practices, you get better information, so you make better decisions, and you could be making 1 degree different better decisions every single day with an interior practice, and end up in a really, really different place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing that I've found too is the slower I move and the quieter I am, that's when happiness in my life actually is able to emerge.
I,
I can't do that when I'm squelching it by running around with my hair on fire and occupying every waking second of my day. You can accomplish anything you want in the world, and it's not going to fulfill you the way that just taking that time to reflect actually can.
I love it. Slow down for success. That's a great
Yep.
place to kind of pin this. Your book, The Warrior Within, congratulations, by the way. I know it's your third
Thank you.
book.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure it was like giving birth, not that I've
Yeah.
ever given birth, but I've written 5 books. I know what it's like. It's a lot of
I
work.
think that's the closest as men that we can come to doing that. But that's, yeah, I agree.
And do you have a like a website that you wanted people to find that at, or do you just send them to Amazon?
Yeah, nativediscovery.com is my
Excellent.
website, and that's kind of an overview of everything I do, who I am, and information obviously on all three of my books, including the latest. But
Right.
that's the best way to get a hold of me.
And what's the name again of the documentary?
The first one I was featured in is called The Warrior Tradition. That
Mm-hmm.
came out in 2019. It aired nationally on Veterans Day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one that I was the host and producer of came out last year, and that's called Discovering Your Warrior Spirit.
Awesome.
Both on PBS.
PBS. I'll have to look for those.
Yeah.
Are they on Netflix? If I were to search Netflix, or
I'm not sure. PBS.org. I know that's
check.
the main place to find them.
And what about social media? Did you play in that realm?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook business page. I'm on Twitter and have my own YouTube channel.
Okay.
So that I'm pretty easy to find online.
Just search your name for those.
Yeah, for LinkedIn, and then on Facebook, it's Building Warriors is the website. Yeah.
Well, AJ, it's been a real honor talking to you. Thanks so much for your work and for doing what you do and for your presence and for keeping the warrior spirit alive and training people. It's really important right now, as we head through this next decade, right? We need warriors with a big heart to lead from the front.
Agree 100%. Chimigwechniji. Thank you very much, my friend, for having me on today.
Yeah. Hoo-yah.
Hoo-yah.
That means the same thing.
Yeah.